Everybody to the Fully Remote Talkshow. We are on episode 20. This talk show is targeted at leaders who are adapting their style to a remote first world. And today we're talking about like remote work in some companies, non-tech companies, larger companies that we are not quite aware of. And because largely like the people who all come to this show have come from like this bubble of technology companies that we've all been like connected with. Um, and so what is this remote work for other companies is a topic that we wanted to talk about. Like when we think about like other companies, it's not just the construction workers or factory workers for whom remote first doesn't make sense. There is a lot of knowledge workers who are in companies for whom technology is not the first thing that they think about. So how do they handle this? And so I want to talk about this, and who better to be here with us than Scott, who is the VP of Communication and External Relations at Business Council of Alberta. Welcome to the show, Scott. Um,
Thanks, Arjun. Really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
yeah, and so Scott and I connected over an article that Scott wrote on a journal about the return to office. He specifically called out that, like, if you care about career development, get back to the office, and that got me
I
intrigued.
did.
It was a perfect, title that got me like intrigued, and I reached out to him. And I thought, like, it's like we would have a lot to disagree, but it turned out that Scott and I had like a lot more to agree upon on these things, and we were able to uncover layers of remote. Remote is not the same for people who are early in the career versus late in the career. Remote is not the same for technology companies, non-technology. Remote is not the same for smaller companies as much as bigger companies. And so all of these things started like coming up. And I said, like, you know what, Scott, you should like come on our talk show and talk about this. And so I'm so glad that you're here.
Oh, I'm really glad to be here as well, Arjun. And I'm so appreciative that you reached out. It's interesting. Anytime you put an idea into the world, and one of the ones that I put out was, hey, there are some career benefits for being back in the office. And you run a tech company and an online platform, and you said, hey, I don't totally agree with you. I think that that a lot can be done online. You and I hopped on a call. We were both kind of ready for a debate, and I don't think we see this issue totally the same. But you're right. There was more that we agreed on than disagreed on. And so he said, well, this has been so much fun. Why don't we hop on the talk show and do that? So a little bit of time has passed, and I'm glad to be here.
Perfect. Awesome. So I want to ask you a lot of questions, but before that, I just want to like quickly check in with the folks that are over here, like a one-word phrase, a sort of a check-in question. If you want to have one particular skill, which skill would you love to have? Just like enter that as a word on this input box over here on the side, and in a minute we can see what everybody else has typed. The idea here is to get people into a zone where they are thinking outside of what their daily routine is, and like you've joined a meeting and now you're ready to hear for some new ideas. So let's just click into this mode. Which skill would you love to have? I'm gonna quickly see what the rest of the folks think over here. Public speaking, soccer, improv, cook, multi-language, animate, improv. Oh wow, okay. Looks like a way variety of things that like people wish that they had. This is great. I appreciate that when everybody gets a chance to think about the skills that they don't have, it's like taking you to a whole new world, which is what we want to do over here is try to bring new perspectives and ideas. Please jump in, and I'm going to have a new setup today where we're going to have like a nice fireside chat where we're going to chat with Scott over here. If you have questions, there is a raise hand button in the top on the right over there. You can click on it and we can bring you up on stage to ask a question to Scott or me, or just share your comments as well. I'll jump right in, Scott. Like, tell us a little bit more about like your role over here, and like how do you end up talking to so many different companies about all these things. So just tell us a little bit more about your role.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm vice president of communications and external for an organization called the Business Council of Alberta. So I'll explain what I mean by each of those things. So the Business Council of Alberta is a nonprofit public policy organization. We're a think tank, for lack of a better term, or a quick way to sort of talk about it. And we're focused on the province of Alberta in Canada. And I know that we've got, I think you're in the US there, Arjun, and I think we've got folks from a couple of different countries here. So Alberta is the second most westerly province in Canada, right next to British Columbia, just sort of above Montana. And about 4.5 million people live in Alberta. The two main cities are Calgary and Edmonton, and it's really sort of becoming the third biggest tech hub in the country of Canada. So that's kind of exciting beyond a couple of sort of really established ones. So lots of tech businesses that we work with. So the Business Council of Alberta, we produce good public policy ideas. We work with businesses and we work with people to figure out what the challenges are in our society, and we recommend good policy ideas to government that'll make life better for people and also for the economy. My particular members, the folks that I represent, are the chief executives of 120 of mostly the sort of medium to largest companies in Alberta. Alberta is really well known for the energy industry, the agriculture industry, and now enhancing for tech as well. We've also got quite a large transportation logistics sector. And I think that actually is some of what brings me here today talking to you is that although I work with plenty of tech businesses and folks who are on the fast growth stage, I work with even more sort of large established businesses, many of them hundreds, even thousands of employees a lot of the time. And they have a different view of remote. This is something I've been talking to them a lot over the last couple of years.
This is great. Yeah, I want to jump right into it. That part of it is what is that view? What are the top things that you've learned from talking to these companies when it comes to remote first? Off the top, maybe one question is that is this a toothpaste out of tube situation where they think that okay, now we cannot undo this, or are people vehemently trying to bring people back into the offices pre-pandemic days, and where in this spectrum are people at this point in time?
Right. I'll give you the answer that I always hate, which is it's a little bit of both, right? And I'll try not to do that, but I think broadly speaking, for 90% of businesses, it is a toothpaste can't go back in the tube kind of realization that what the pandemic accelerated trends that were already happening. But as we know, with kind of with anything involving technological adoption, it's not usually the capabilities of the technology that's your major hurdle. It's usually the acceptance of the employee base or the user base or that kind of thing. Are people willing to do this and willing to work on it? And the reality is that everybody is now. Everybody figured out how to work remotely, how to do these sorts of video conferences, and most people are pretty comfortable with it now. So I think in the best possible way, we're never going back. There are a few businesses who have this really hardcore presenteeism culture, and I understand and respect that too. But I'd say that's a very sort of small minority of folks. Having said that, I think that especially in big companies, there is for many of them, there's a recognition that full remote is going to be hard or potentially even impossible. And so it's going to be more complicated. And I'll tell you why it's impossible. I know I'm sitting on the Fully Remote Talk Show, but for some folks, for instance, especially in very large companies, almost all of them have some version of field workers. And that comes in various forms. But if you think about a construction company or an energy company, they have people that work in the field in a truck. They need to go out somewhere and use tools to move stuff around. And we haven't found a good way to make that remote yet. That's going to involve drones and robots. But the same is true for anyone who's got retail. There are retail people who are in the store, stocking shelves, ringing cash registers. Or I mentioned transportation logistics. Airlines. There are pilots who fly the planes. There are flight attendants who are on those planes. So all those sorts of things. Most of those companies have become very comfortable with their office workers being remote. And in fact, I'm even talking to some large companies that are moving to the results only work environment, if you're familiar with that terminology.
No.
So, okay, yeah, well, we'll unpack that in a sec. But for the other companies that have a combination of in-office and on-location staff, and on-location staff where it's really essential, they're thinking a lot about how they meet the needs of the office workers, many of whom would like to do at least part of their job remotely, but also being fair to those staff who have to, who need to show up to be able to do their job. So there's actually a lot of talk of equity going on. How can we be equitable? How can we be fair to our overall employee base? And I think that's really important. Some of the things that are getting talked about is, well, how can we enhance the experience, even the digital experience of the person who's working out of their truck a lot of the time? Can we get them better equipment? Can we make sure that they've always got high-speed Wi-Fi in their truck? Can we make sure that they can do a meeting like this and not feel like they're a second-class citizen when they're talking to the executives? So that's sort of one thing. And then if you want to, we could pick up on that a little bit more. But the results-only work environment. So this is a concept when I was in business school 20 years ago that was just sort of like coming up, and it seems like maybe its day has come. So the concept is that you say to your employees, we've set such clear targets. The only thing that matters to me is that you hit the results, right? And so it doesn't matter to me where you do it from, what time you do it. If you can get it done in one day this week, not 5 days this week, that's your own business. Maybe your unlimited vacation sort of concepts find their way into there as well. And that's finding a very natural fit with the remote first environment.
This is great. I think I want to like talk about many of these more, but one question that I have is around like you mentioned that like the acceptance is the big thing. Technology thing seems like it's like largely solved for, which comes to like culture, right? Like it's like a big culture piece that people who are very well established have established culture, and like now it's like kind of rewriting it. And that was my question, is around like, are people really rewriting the culture? Are they like putting in like processes and norms into place and like making this like a first class that like we are going to make remote first? And how are they doing that, and how many of them are doing that effectively as well?
Well, first I'll tell you honestly that many of the large companies I'm working with, I think like new branches of HR are being created in front of our eyes. There's new policy and new ideas that they're having to come up with. Very few of them, of the large companies that I work with, are using the term remote first. As that better, but they're integrating remote into what they're doing, and there certainly are some that are sort of talking about remote first. Absolutely, there's big company culture change going on here. And I'll share a story with you, an anecdote that like kind of really brought it home for me, because I talk to lots of companies. So in this case, we're talking about a large law firm. I won't tell you what firm, but not that they'd mind. And so the large law firm folks were telling me that when the pandemic first happened, the people that were hardest to get out of their offices and to get comfortable at home were like the really senior partners, the folks who had been in the firm for a long time, had come up with paper and pen and face-to-face sort of meetings. They were really resistant to this thing. Then something interesting happened over the course of the pandemic. Lots of those people got really comfortable in their home at home. Lots of them do really well. So maybe they've got a nice cottage to go to or something like that. They renovated their office. And now those folks are the ones, they're the last ones who want to go back to the office, actually. They're the ones kind of driving the cultural change, saying, I spent 30 years working crazy hours with a crazy long commute, all to get to this office downtown. And I don't want to do that anymore, actually. So, the people who were the biggest opponents in some ways at the beginning are now turning into the biggest allies of remote work.
That is very interesting. I think like the inertia happens much higher, and I think like it also like speaks to the fact that like they're so very well established in their career that they don't really have to like go with the whims and fancies of other people, and they can like define it, and so they're realizing the comforts of this. This makes a ton of sense. I'm gonna quickly jump into like one quick activity over here. Again, this is like very much in line with what we were talking over here, right? Like, what is making, and you already touched upon a few of these points, right? Like, what is making it difficult for these larger like non-tech companies to embrace remote first? And I think you brought up a couple of very good points, right? Like this presence of, I mean, I noted a few of them as to what I've been hearing, and I wanted to like both have you comment on these as well as like share what else is there, like say come up with like what else list over here. The first one that you rightly mentioned is that there are presence of non-tech jobs that cannot be done remotely, and so how are you going to be equitable? I mean, like, or the equity part of it, that makes a lot of sense. And then you touch upon another one which I really have been hearing that as well, is like sort of the result only, like it's like I'm going to trust, like, so I'm just broadly putting that as trust, as like I trust that like you will do the right thing, but like I only care about the results. Doesn't matter how you do it, and like that part of it is definitely one of those things. A couple of other things that I've been hearing is that like and like I'd love to hear your comment on this. Is like innovation happens in person and it could be stifled, and like it's like that's another thing that like I'm hearing. I don't know how much of it is true there. There is one which is kind of seems obvious around like um, the sunk cost of like, oh, we have built all these office spaces and
Mm,
now we need to like, bring you back over here because we've invested
yeah.
heavily on this. Again, I don't know how much this is kind of true for larger companies that have invested in like real estate a lot, and so is this one of the factors? And the last one I want to add here, which I've been hearing around like, um, sort of the team, or like the company loyalty connection bonding that
Mhm.
happens is not possible outside of this. So these are some things that I'm hearing. Love to hear your comments on these, as well as like what else should we add to this list.
Yeah, so I think it'd be worth talking through every one of those if we get the
Sure.
chance to. I'm going to pick up on two though. So I like the sunk cost building one because I think I can give you a bit of a perspective on that, especially when you're dealing with larger companies. They typically have quite significant, physical building footprints that they've had for many years, and that's both a challenge and an opportunity. So I've talked to a lot of companies, and I'd say the most common approach has been they've surveyed their own employees, and they've said, some of this has happened a few months ago now, but they've said to their employees, hey, when we reopen the offices, how much are you interested in coming back in? Do you want to be in 5 days a week? Do you want to be in zero? And so every company's been a little bit different, but there's a pattern that's emerged that I've heard, which is hardly anybody, and in some cases, companies say zero people have said 5 days a week. So hardly anybody's saying 5 days a week. On the other end of the spectrum, every company has got a chunk of employees saying 0 days a week. I don't want to come in at all unless there's a really real reason. So hardly anybody at one extreme and a good chunk at the other end. But actually, the bulk of employees tend to fit somewhere in the middle. People saying 1 or 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 days a week, which is interesting because, I think for a whole lot of reasons, hybrid is actually harder than fully remote. But I think that hybrid is most likely where we're headed, in some ways as well. So we're going to have, in parts of business are hard, we're going to have to figure out how we do that. But what that's almost certain to mean is that companies, and you talk about what they're rewriting what their floor footprint needs are, based just even on that story that I tell there. We're talking like, somewhere between 20% less demand for office space, or maybe even a lot more than that, depending on which company you're talking about. And that introduces all kinds of things like hoteling, how we're going to use the office space that we have, and how we could be equitable to that chunk of people who are really never almost interested in coming into the office if we're going to be servicing them. And then, yeah, so I'll stop there and see if you want to talk more about that. And then I want to talk about the other one, which is sort of the career development side of it too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, yeah, we can. I want to talk more about the career development side in a separate question over here for sure. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about like these other things around like, the team or the company loyalty, the connection. Like, what are you hearing about that?
So I think this is a real concern I'm hearing, particularly from tech companies. And Arjun, I'm interested in what you're hearing from your peers. But the story kind of goes like this: if I'm working completely remote, and let's say I'm working in my home office all the time in my basement, and I'm doing a job like software development, I'm coding, and if I'm not feeling any real connection to the people that I'm working with or to the mission of the organization, and somebody else offers me another $10,000 a year to do a really similar job from my same place in my home, I guess my backyard right now, if I can sit here in my backyard and I can do it for a different company, it's kind of like, why wouldn't I, right? I might as well just jump and do that. And I think, another theme is that in the old environment, the in-person environment, some things came easy, and a certain amount of team building and a certain amount of culture you didn't even really have to work that hard for, because people would just bump into each other. They'd start liking the people that they were working with. And so even if you didn't try that hard, usually some culture would develop. I think the thing in remote is you have to try now. It takes intentionality, right? Because if all you do is you email that person assignments and you never talk to them and they hardly even know anything about the mission of the company, yeah, they are going to jump when somebody offers them a little bit more money.
No, yeah, I mean, I think that's actually a very good point, and which kind of brings back to like the other one that I mentioned about like, it's like it's almost like a culture rewrite in that like you make some of these things as first class things. I mean, like, like the intentionality of like
Mm-hmm.
bringing these teams together, and like how you would like um, build the team and like bond the team. All that needs to be done intentionally, and there are like sort of tools and opportunities emerging to make that happen even in a remote context. And that's kind of like what is getting interesting. I mean, like some examples are like companies that we work with who are like, talking about like like, hey, can we just like bring you once in 3 months into like this amazing place, fly everybody over there, still cheaper than like holding an office and everything, but like just give that like fantastic experience so you have that offsite bonding experience. There are some people who are doing like, how can we do like more team building over these virtual environments and not make it look like how it would be when you are on a regular video conferencing call. And so there's opportunities that's opening up as well. So all
I like that
interesting.
concept you're saying about like, holding something like, I don't know if you said once a year or once a quarter, but I imagine that, I said hybrid's harder and hybrid is harder, but it offers the opportunity that we could do both things better.
Right.
We could do our day to day in this kind of an environment where we've got people from several different countries all collaborating and sharing ideas. That's a super hard thing to do, incredibly expensive. You're going to fly us all together every week to do this. And then, so we can do this better remotely. But then if we are going to get together every once in a while, every quarter or something like that, because there's some stuff that's going to be really valuable in person, well, let's do that better too. Let's not just make that a lame day of meetings in a boardroom. Let's say, hey, we're investing in this. This is the one time in the year, the one time in the quarter we're doing it. Let's make it really valuable.
Exactly. And then people are, I think, famously like, it's like renting out these like crazy ranches and like, giving like
Totally.
almost like a 5-star treatment to their employees because that's like the one time that you're bringing everybody together. So might as well like splurge on that. So yeah, you're right.
I'll
Like
tell you
there's opportunity.
one example I heard about that recently, and I've heard several others. So, one thing that people talk about that probably can make it into the list, what makes it difficult. I'm sure you've heard people say sales, right? Because sales
Mm,
is about relationships. Of course, we can do sales online, but lots of
right.
salespeople sort of like to have relationships with their customers and that kind of thing. So I'm hearing about folks who normally they would have been visiting their customers in other cities. They would have said every month. We got to be in there meeting them every month in the past, and now they've realized that through remote that's going to drop. They don't need to do that every month. They need to check in with them every month, maybe even more frequently than every month. Maybe they're doing it every week or two now. But the in-person bit, that might be every quarter. In some cases, it's only once a year. But they go out there to visit their customer for most of a week. They spend the whole week there. They make it really, sort of special. They bring all the staff. They spend money on entertainment or on team building or things like that. And in that sense, you get, like I was saying, the best of both, better of both. Maybe more frequent check-ins with your client than you could have done previously, and the in-persons, you have the incentive to invest in it.
Right. Okay. Makes a lot of sense. Um, let's jump to that career development question that you that we first connected on, and like I would like to like know a bit more about like what you've thought since, and also like maybe we should share about that is like how does career development get affected because of this remote first, and also um, is that reason enough to like have a little bit of hybrid, or is there mitigations that you can do the way in a remote first world?
Well, I'll tell you how I'm thinking about this, and this might
Sure.
be one of the areas where you and I have some different perspective. But I I wrote an article a couple of months ago, as we started off saying, and you're right. The headline basically said, if you want to grow your career, get back to the office, at least part time. And I wasn't saying that necessarily because I want that to be the case, but I wrote that article because I kept hearing the same story over and over, and I was worried about it. And the story went something like this: companies would say, we've left it open. Some employees can come back, some employees can't come back. Or sorry, some employees can come back, others are choosing to work from home, and we're fine with that. But the tough thing is, I can tell you that the folks who are back in the office, they're getting some opportunities that the folks out of the office are not. And
Mm,
those opportunities look like just the opportunity to overhear or oversee kind of a phone call, a tough call between two business partners or something like that. How do they work through that? Or getting pulled into that late last
mm,
minute situation. It's 10 minutes after 6. Something urgent happens, you tend to look at who's physically around you. And so I was actually really concerned. I remain really concerned that especially some young people are going to make a mistake without knowing they're making a mistake. And
mm.
that's going to be that they're going to say, hey, my company said I could work totally remote. I'm going to work totally remote. And then 5 years from now, they might ask themselves, how come my career hasn't developed quite as quickly as this other person has? It might have just been because that person was in the office at that moment to experience something, to shine, to get a little bit more mentorship. So I don't think that's an insurmountable challenge, but I think we have to be serious that it's real.
Right. Yeah. Again, I think it goes back to like being rewriting your culture to have intentionality around that, and like how career ladder, like the remotely biases around that as well. And yeah, and we've been hearing quite a few companies taking pretty drastic steps along. I wouldn't say drastic, but like pretty clear steps along in the direction. Some examples being that like even if you are in a meeting with like 5 people in a conference room, you got to all open your laptops and be on a call so that like everybody feels that same experience, even somebody's remote, like, so sort of subtle things like that. But again, yeah, I feel like it's pretty hard to like beat that idea of like somebody literally being physically in around you versus like irrespective of what you do over there. So one sort of larger question that I have as we are like more coming more closer and closer to the end of this is around you talking to all these companies and you are like hearing a lot about these changes and how people are adapting to this, and like where do you see like sort of the big opportunity? This might be like a sort of a plug into your like like your the next decade part of it that you're doing, but like
Mhm.
where are the big opportunities that have like stepped up, I mean like turned up right now that you think like technology can solve, and or even if technology can't solve it, that's okay, but like where are the opportunities that are coming up right now?
Yeah, well, and thank you for talking about that. Yeah, we just put out a really big project for us called Define the Decade, which is sort of a big 10-year economic development strategy, and welcome to anyone to check it out. I think there are huge opportunities. It's sort of that strategy talks about a huge global level opportunity in energy solutions, how we solve the clean energy challenge of the future. Talks about a huge global opportunity in food and agriculture. We got to feed 2 billion more people in the next 25 years. And it talks about another one in life sciences, how we lead healthy lives and bring in the medical advancements that can help people live longer and healthier and happier. And so I actually think that there are opportunities in sort of all of those areas that we can look at with technology. It's maybe a simple one, but I think the most obvious one is about collaboration between people who are physically distant from each other. When
Mm.
we were focused on a physical office space, your network tended to be the people who were closest to you physically in your city or in your state, or people that could kind of you could pull into things. Now there's just like absolutely no constraint on that, right? Like take the medical idea. If you want to look, if you seriously want to have a session saying how are we going to cure this disease, it can be done now to pull in the top 10 experts everywhere in the world to a session
Mm.
like this, and you can do that on a few days notice, most likely, if you've got something. So the opportunity is, if you really want to get something done, now you can access the best brain power in the world to do it. I think that's one of the areas that excites me the most.
That's actually a great way of putting it, is you can attract like the biggest brains for this, and there is no more constraints and projects that are sort of across the board. And I think this opens up in like many different ways, as you said, right? Like including like classrooms where you're learning with just students who are just practically near you, I mean for a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
a higher things, and like or like where you're learning only from teachers, which is all like changing already, but like being able to like think about like learning there as well. So tremendous opportunities there as well. But I like that how you generalized this as um, bringing brains from all over the world together.
Well, think about what that used to take, right? If you want to bring the
Right.
10 smartest people in the world on hepatitis together, you'd have to put, 10 people on 10 different planes who would have to give up several days as their time as they fly into one central location, kind of all talk together, and hopefully they really accomplish something. That may still have some value, but now we could get all of those 10 people. We could probably get them on a call tomorrow if we wanted to, especially if we had something exciting enough to unify them together, a challenge that they all wanted to get together on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a great way of thinking about it. And I want to just double click on that as the last question around here, right? Like, so the whole, I mean, this is specific to like what we are doing over here at Zinc as well, is like in these companies that you talk to, like these, energy companies and CN companies, what is the state of collaboration? And like, it's like, how are they thinking about this at this point of time? And are there any specific opportunities for these companies that you see as well?
Yeah, and I think, and it's a bit of a plug also for what you're trying to do, because I think you're trying to introduce more tools to make collaboration possible, to make things fun, to make more different types of human interactions. That's totally a pain point and an opportunity area, I think, for sure. You sort of foreshadowed a little bit earlier, but one of the things that people definitely say is that innovation, creativity, collaboration, those things are a little harder in the online environment. Not impossible, and actually, I think maybe the challenge is sometimes exaggerated because creative people can still be creative almost anywhere. But it's the old tool where you get everyone holding sticky notes and you stick them on a board and you move them around and people throw out ideas. That's been hard to replicate in the digital environment. And I think, for companies like yours or anybody who can really say, and maybe even show, we can deliver the same kind of collaboration and innovation results that you used to have with the Sharpies and the sticky notes. And I think that is infinitely possible. The Sharpies and the sticky notes are not magically powerful. So we can totally do collaboration in this kind of an environment. But that's one that I think there's still room to get right.
Perfect. This is fantastic. Yeah, thanks. That was a great note to finish. Did you have anything else that like I didn't ask you? And this is something that I'm asking you particularly because you come from a world where like I might have not even thought of a question or anything that you think that you should share. Like, please do let us know.
No, I think that I think we really talked through all the parts of it. I think for organizations who are in fully remote, for organizations who are in tech, probably just to always be casting a little bit of a thought to like, okay, yeah, but the flight attendant, okay, yeah, but the person who's bringing in at the cash register, how can we make them part of this system as well to build for them too? That was one of the things we started with, and I think it's a neat place to end also.
Perfect. Scott, this was awesome talking to you. Before we kind of wrap up, I wanted to like talk about like the next week's episode that's coming up. We're bringing in Vidya, who is a speaker and a product manager at Facebook, specifically talking about like running inclusive virtual meetings. And how do you have great presence when you talk to a large group of people? She's a speaker who has spoken in like many different virtual forums, and so she is the one who we're going to talk to next week. So please make sure you tune in at the same time. With that, Scott, this was a pleasure having you. Great talking to you about today. For folks who are joining, feel free to share your top takeaway from today's show over there on the side. Scott, thank you.
Arjun, thank you. Keep up the good work, my friend. Look forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you. Have a good one, Scott.